Today, we are talking with Dorie Clark and Robbie Kellman Baxter on how entrepreneurs and business leaders can get their ideas noticed. Very excited to talk with both of you. You both have recently written books. Dorie, your book on Stand Out, How to Find Your Breakthrough Idea and Build a Following Around It. Thank you for including me in it. I thought the way you positioned what I said was perfect. And Robbie Kellman Baxter, author of The Membership Economy. So once you're noticed, once you have a following, and once you're got a business, it's, I can't wait to read your book on turning some of your ordinary customers into members for life. Very interested to learn how you do that, because I'm struggling with that as we speak. So I'll probably use myself as an example, or our team as an example. So look forward to learning more. A little bit of logistics before we get started. I'm your host, Mark Fidelman, managing partner of Fanatics Media. Very excited about today's show and what we're going to learn. As a reminder, we're about how-to content, very specific information, not fluff. If you have any questions, please ask them on the right-hand side with a /Q. Also, tweet out the Blab on the left-hand side. I'll be changing the topics frequently, so you can tweet out each topic. It's pretty cool. It turns it into a GIF, and it shoots it up on Twitter. Subscribe to the guests and give them props. Those little hands in the bottom right-hand corner.
You're getting a lot just from this introduction. You're like people are like, yeah, introduce it, Mark.
It's a competition, actually. Those who get the most claps actually wins. There'll be a prize. I don't know what that prize is, but there'll be a prize at the end of it.
I wish I had a kitten that I could show. That would be amazing.
Oh yeah,
yeah, people love kittens.
Then you'd win, especially yeah. Okay, so we're gonna jump right in, and Dorie, I'm gonna start with you, and I'd like to learn how you become a thought leader. I mean, there are a lot of people trying, but how would you convince, or how do you, when someone's just getting started, how do you coach somebody into becoming a thought leader in an industry or a niche?
So there's a lot of ways to do it, Mark, but let me start with two strategies as exemplified. You see, we've got some living props in the house. You were in my book Stand Out. Robbie was also featured in my book Stand Out. So let me start by just talking about a couple of strategies that you guys exemplify, and part of why I wanted to feature you, because I thought that it was really done in a smart and emblematic fashion. So one thing that you did, Mark, in the section that I have in Stand Out, is about ways to leverage content, because one of the most important things that you can do in becoming a thought leader is create a lot of content and share that with people. I mean, if you are a white collar worker, a knowledge worker, all you have is your ideas, and no one will know how good you are, or if your ideas have any merit whatsoever, unless you start sharing them publicly. That is a necessary step in becoming a thought leader. But a challenge that people run up against really fast is that we're all busy. None of us has enough time. How do we create a reasonable volume of content without just driving ourselves into the ground? And so something that you did really well, we got to know each other because we were both contributing to Forbes, and you had these like massively successful, really well-researched, in-depth posts, and I was asking you about them, and you explained to me your strategy, which I thought was amazing. Basically, it boils down to taking the same piece of content and using it in a million different ways. So in creating a piece of content, and I'm sure you can talk more about this, but you would create like a top 25 list of people in a certain industry. You'd use that not just for writing an article, but also as a means of networking. So you're killing two birds with one stone. You are creating tweets about it. You can create an ebook off of it so that you can get email opt-ins. You have assistants who are helping you crunch the data related to it. So you're leveraging your time. You're getting people on the list to help publicize the list because they're proud to be on the list. I mean, it's just this ingenious way of making one thing count 100 times. So that's one great strategy for thought leadership. A second one, which Robbie really exemplified, is leveraging your affiliations in a strategic way. One of the best ways that you can develop a connection with people and credibility as a thought leader is to take some kind of a positive affiliation you have. It could be, as in Robbie's case, being an alumna of a certain business school. Maybe you used to work at a prominent company. Maybe you're a blogger for a certain publication, or you're an officer of a professional association in your town, whatever it is. But you want to take that one affiliation and leverage it to the max. Go all in. If you're the, the secretary of the local chamber of commerce, make it your job to introduce yourself and have coffees with every member of the Chamber of Commerce, because that is an advantage you have. It's a connection you have. It provides social proof and respectability, and you can really gain a lot of early credibility as a result.
Wow, so well said. And if you ask me to recite things out of my book, I have a lot of trouble, but wow, I don't know. Robbie, can you add to that? How do you become a thought leader? Any strategies that you have around that? What do you do, or what have you seen done that's really become, really effective for people?
Yeah, so there's two parts. I think what Dorie said is fantastic, both about reusing and repurposing content, and also about being thoughtful about the content itself and how that might open doors. So it's been amazing, having just completed writing my first book, maybe/only, we'll see. When you call CEO of a company and you're writing a book on a topic that's of interest to them, they're really interested in talking about it. And then when the book comes out, they want you to come and talk to their company. They might want to use you for consulting. There's a lot of ways that builds momentum. So that's one thing. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that there's kind of two platforms that you want to be thinking about. One of them is a platform for discovery, which is, how do people who don't know about you find out about you? So that might be speaking at conferences, speaking at, when tech companies have their user groups, speaking at those events. That gets you in front of new people. And once
and Robbie, because this is a big one for me, how do you do what Dorie's done, is get those speaking engagements, to get in front of people? Is it a big focus, or is it something that, you wait for the phone to ring?
So I did not wait for the phone to ring. I started calling, and I thought about hiring a publicist or a PR firm. And I asked a lot of my friends who'd been really successful with their thought leadership platforms. And the people that had, there may be a publicist out there that's going to say, I'm fantastic, Robbie, or somebody says, I had a fantastic experience with my publicist. But most people that I talked to that have had success did it themselves, maybe with some assistance and somebody, executing. But I actually just researched, here's all the bloggers that I want to know. Here's all the company. This was really, I thought, very smart. Here's all the companies that support the membership economy. The tech companies. And so I reached out to them and I said, I'd love to speak at your events. What conferences do you go to? And then it started building on itself. And there's really momentum. A year after publication, now I'm getting phone calls from people I don't know. But I really was very strategic and very deliberate about getting those first speaking opportunities.
Okay, because I love this topic, because I struggle with it. I do get calls, but I'm not proactively going out and getting speaking engagements. And for me, Dorie said this before, I repurpose it on SlideShare. I get a much bigger audience on SlideShare than I do an audience in person. So there's ways of repurposing that as well. But any other strategies, Robbie, you have? Because I agree with you. I think the offline, it's probably the best thought leadership strategy. If you want to become a thought leader, first of all, have a good story to tell. But, how do you get in front of those crowds? And how do you get it sounds like you're proactively calling the right conferences to say, hey, I'm offering my services, or how do you do that?
Yeah. And also, what's your ask, Robbie? Like, do you just say hey, I wrote a book, can I speak? Or what's the thing you say?
Right. I have said that. I think I've gotten a little better now. Number one, I try to get other people to say it for me. So I'll actually figure out, I wanted to speak at the Electronic Retailing Association, for example. So figuring out who I know that's affiliated there. And so that the ask comes from them, or I can go to them and say, hey, your member X, Y, and Z thought that it would be really useful to have somebody like me speaking at your event. So that's one thing. And the other thing is to say, when the book came out, I said things like, the book's coming out, and I think it would be really useful for both of us if you participated in the launch. You'll get some of the momentum that I have, and you'll have something first ones to have it. The other thing that I did is I never just offer the speaking. I always offer a webinar in conjunction with that. Because they keep sending out the invitations, and it builds interest in the conference, which is why they do it, but it also builds interest in me. And
sneaky, that's good.
Yeah, and then the other thing that fits into this is once you use these other platforms to build awareness, and I love SlideShare also, so that was a great point. You want to bring them back to your own community, and that can be with your email list. It can be in your Twitter relationships. It can be in a private community. So you really want to think about, what am I using for discovery and what am I using for building relationships? They're really two different strategies that have to fit together.
Okay, Dorie, anything to add to that? I mean, you talked about Duke as a reason why you're getting the speaking engagements over in Eastern Europe. Are there any other strategies that you have? You seem to speak a lot. You're out on the circuit quite a bit.
I do, yes, and I actually have taken a slightly different tack than Robbie. I, for a while, tried to do proactive outbound marketing and just found that it really wasn't that successful, because a lot of the times the organizers, I mean, clearly Robbie's had some good success, but a lot of the times the organizers they really want to be picking you. They don't want to be pitched like it's this fun thing for them to say, oh, I'm going to find this person. Oh, I'm going to get that person. And if you are going to them saying, oh, pick me, it's like the overeager person on like a dating website. Like they want to choose you. They don't want you coming after them. And so I have actually chosen, much like you, Mark, to invest more of my time in creating inbound marketing so that people will feel motivated to reach out to me. And so I often hear from folks, oh, well, I read this article you wrote for Harvard Business Review or something like that. And so that made me think of you because our conference topic is related to this article. So that's really where I've been investing largely. Now, that being said, if I do have a contact somewhere, I mean, Robbie was talking about warm leads. So if I have a contact somewhere and it's somewhere that I want to speak, I will certainly reach out to that person and say, hey, do you guys bring in speakers? What does that entail? Can you introduce me to somebody? But if you were just literally approaching it cold, it's very difficult.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, unless you're well known in the industry, which is about thought leadership, I found it very difficult. Even I still find it kind of difficult because I'm not really focused on it, right? I'm not focused on speaking. So I have a handful of conferences I speak at every year, and I haven't really expanded beyond that. Any thoughts or comments on that? No?
So,
okay.
So I certainly can weigh in a little bit. I mean, in fact, I recently tallied my talks because I was curious how much I was going out there. So in 2013, I spoke 51 times. In 2014, 61. And last year, 2015, I spoke 74 times. So it's a pretty intensive schedule that I've been doing. And so, yeah, I mean, I've been focusing on it because speaking does have this kind of dual benefit where essentially you are getting paid to do your marketing. Now, that being said, I will do some talks for free depending on if they are a kind of prestige assignment. So like the authors at Google series, for instance, is free, or a TEDx talk, that's for free, but you get really lovely video out of it and their channels are really well subscribed to. So it's worth it for other reasons. But for most gigs, if you're speaking to a company, if you're speaking to an association, you will get paid, and it puts you in front of, however many people, 100 people, 500 people, what have you, so that there's the possibility that might lead to other engagements as well. So in that regard, it's actually a great form of marketing because you're getting paid to promote yourself.
Yeah, I mean, that's the best, right? If you can get paid to do it. And if you're that desired because you have a book that's come out and you're getting paid, it's almost like you're making more money on the paid speaking gigs than you are the book. I mean, depending on if you have a publisher or not. I meany that's been my experience anyway. The publisher takes so much that you make more money with the speaking gigs. Okay, so go ahead, Robbie.
Right. I was just going to say that you also want to think about, what the thought leadership has to be in service of something else. Is it just to become famous, or are you trying to sell consulting for you have a consulting firm, or you're trying to become a speaker, or are you really in the author business where you're trying to sell 1 million copies? The strategies will be very different.
Okay. And we are going to take questions on the left-hand side as appropriate. I'll just kind of weave them into our discussion as I see them. So if you hit a /Q and then a question, Art has mastered this, as you can see on the left-hand side. We will add them. So don't be afraid. It shows it in a queue, and then I'll ask them as we go along here. But the next subject, one I'm very, very interested in, because we've done a pretty good job as a team in building up community. But let's start with Robbie on this one. How do you build a big community around your brand? I mean, how do you do it? How do you bring these members once you've got a customer base? How do you turn them into members as you write in your book? How is that done?
Yeah. So membership, the transaction when they join is the starting line, not the finish line. And the more you can curate the experience that they're getting after they join you and teach them how to get the most value from being part of the community and educate them on the culture of the community. So for example, if the culture is we help each other, we share our stories, to demonstrate that and to seed your community with people who are sharing stories. So I actually ask people, up front, you're part of the foundational team, share your stories. And also to encourage them to bring people in, often by giving them status within the organization. So everybody, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, everybody wants to mitigate risk, but then they want to belong, and then they want to be held in high regard. And one way that you can let people be held in high regard is you can ask them to take a leadership role in the community. So those are a few things that I've done with larger organizations and with solopreneurs to start building momentum in the community, because it's often a chicken and egg problem. Nobody wants to come to the community because nobody's there.
Dorie, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that was really well said. What was the original question again, Mark?
So how do you build a big community around your brand? Now, you've done it. So what are the strategies that you've done? Is it about engagement? For me, it's like the more I engage, the more the community engages. But it's a lot of work because I'm on multiple channels.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm interested in how you do it.
Yeah, so this is actually a piece that I talk about in my book, Standout. The first half of the book is about how do you develop the ideas that you get known for. The latter half of the book is about how you build that following around them. And essentially what I discovered in researching a bunch of experts like yourselves is that it's fundamentally a 3-step process to build this following around your brand. Step 1 is building your network, the kind of close-in people around you who are your trusted band of advisors who can help guide you. Step 2 is you're broadening out, you're building an audience, which is where you're starting to communicate with the public. So maybe it's doing blabs, maybe it's blogging, maybe it's giving speeches, but it's exposing your ideas to people who haven't heard them before. And then finally, once you've built up enough of an audience, once you start to have momentum for your brand, it becomes the latter part. It's building a community. And that is where you start to encourage your audience members to talk to each other. And that creates momentum around your ideas. They start recruiting new people. Your idea starts going viral. So how can you encourage your audience to talk to each other? There's both online and offline strategies for that. So if we take online, it could be creating a listserv, a membership community, a Google group, a Facebook group, something like that. But it's giving people a channel where they can talk to each other around a shared interest. So for instance, there's one that I'm involved in. It's a Facebook page started by a speaker. And it's for professional speakers to just like trade ideas. That's really valuable. I just did a webinar earlier today with a guy named Dov Gordon who runs a Google group listserv for people who do joint ventures. And, that's really valuable. So those are really active online communities. There's also offline communities. And so conferences, meetups, things like that are pretty good examples. Chris Guillebeau, the author, created something called the World Domination Summit, which is an annual conference that maybe 600 people go to. That's a way to bring his tribe and his community together, which is pretty powerful. Even if you were to start your own kind of local entrepreneurs meetup or whatnot, it's a way of facilitating the connection of your community. In fact, Robbie and I first met because we joined a community of solo consultants, and so we got to know each other by going to a sort of meetup. I forget which one it was. Maybe it was in San Francisco, but I think we already knew each other before that. So anyway, but we've been to things around communities like that.
Yeah, and it's really important, I think, that you have the offline and the online piece concurrently, because, can you hear me?
Yeah. We hear you fine, yeah.
Okay, great. That you have the offline piece and the online piece, and you have them working together. And a lot of people have said, with the rise of all these Google Hangouts and meetups and online kinds of, Facebook things and Twitter, people aren't going to want to meet, but people are really hungry for connection. And so incorporating that, like I've seen out here in Silicon Valley, a lot of tech companies are now introducing physical conferences, even as associations, professional associations and societies, which are mostly on the East Coast, are bemoaning the lack of members that are willing to come in person. So it's really about the content. I mean, it kind of gets back to part one of Dorie's book, which is have the good content. But once you have that, people will come together and meet in person. And that's where you build the trust that you can then leverage through those online media.
See, we do it online more than anything else. And I'm getting an echo. But we do it with a site called Influitive. It's a platform where
I know those guys.
Okay, so it's gamified and there's challenges and the people are competing against one another, and we find that to work extremely well. So we almost roll this out to every customer that we have. So we figured out how to build community online, but I'm wondering if you two know of any other ways of building community online that have been effective. Maybe it's a Facebook group or a LinkedIn group. Anything that you guys would recommend that people watching this do?
Go ahead, Robbie.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I mean, you were talking about gamification. I think that's a really important concept, and I'm guessing people are familiar with it, but it's the idea of creating artificial reasons for somebody to do something before the real benefits kick in. That's really what gamification is. And you want to, in any kind of online experience that you have, you want to consider using that to get people engaged as quickly as possible. To answer your question, I think it depends, what kind of a brand you're trying to build has a lot to do with where you want to do it. For B2B kinds of brands where you're trying to reach out to people in their professional capacity, I think LinkedIn is probably the best place. But if there's more of a personal development component, Facebook or Google Hangouts are also pretty effective.
Yeah. I'll also just mention that in addition to gamification, something that I think is intriguing is exclusivity. I recently listened to a really good podcast interview, which I'd recommend to any of you guys. The show is called Internet Business Mastery, and they recently did an interview with a guy named Ryan Levesque, specifically on the topic of how it is that in this sort of commodified thing, like, oh, who doesn't have a Facebook group, right? Well, he has a Facebook group that more than 1,000 people pay $100 per month to be part of. And he has assembled, apparently a lot of really interesting high-level people on there, and has managed to make it to make people consider it a valuable enough resource that they're willing to shell out $1,200 per year to do that. And I think that's kind of a good feat of psychological jujitsu. So if anyone wants to hear that, that is a recent episode of Internet Business Mastery podcast.
Okay. Robbie, anything else to add? I'm gonna pose Art's question here, and have you guys look at this and answer it yourself. I think it's somewhat relevant to what we're talking about. I find that building community involves getting them to buy into your story, whether you're a brand or an individual. If you're on a mission or you have a story that you're talking about and you want them bought into it, how do you get them to be a part of that story or about part of that success? So I'm wondering if you guys, have any experience around building community through storytelling.
Yeah, so sure. I think storytelling is always useful. People love stories, and when you try to engage somebody with a new educational concept and trying to inform them something, having a story to lead in or a story to illustrate what you've done is just good best practice. But I think in building a community, what you want to focus on is what is the mission of your members that you're trying to help them achieve, and using that as your guiding star, and making sure that the stories touch on both your experiences in achieving that mission and spotlighting your members' experiences. Because I run out of my own stories at some point, and bringing in stories of the people that I work with and my clients is really, really relevant for their peers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right on. And to Art's point, do I coach people to use their stories? Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important, especially because your story is the ultimate differentiator. We live in a world where there are lots of people who write books. There are lots of consultants. There are lots of entrepreneurs, blah, 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 right? Who is not a leadership coach? Everyone is a leadership coach. And the only reason that people are going to want to choose you ultimately, yes, it's important to have a differentiated offering and, your unique value proposition and all of that. But what really does it in a lot of ways, what gets people to understand why you is telling some story about why are you doing this? Why do you care about this? How has it touched you? I literally just a couple of weeks ago had a coaching client who was coming to me for help with his message. And I was encouraging him. He grew up under very adverse circumstances. He grew up very poor. And he really didn't talk about that much because, to a certain extent, it felt weird for him to talk about it. Like, oh, is that sort of, are people going to think badly of me? Or is that kind of a, is that just like a strange thing to be talking about? Because it was outside of the realm of what he was, the service he was selling. But I actually encouraged him that, it's not like it's a flag that you wave all the time, but as you tell your story, as you explain your narrative, it actually really shaped who he was. It really shaped his philosophy and his approach and how he viewed the world. And I thought, that's really interesting because a lot of people don't do it that way. And, just see a very public example, Damon John just came out with a book, on a similar thing called The Power of Broke, and about how he started out, really scrappy, not a lot of money, and was able to make himself a successful entrepreneur. And that's a very different thing than my client was doing. But it shows the importance of grounding it, because if Donald Trump was writing a book called The Power of Broke, I think people would probably look at that and say, okay, Mr. You inherited money from your dad. Got it. But if Damon John is able to tell a story about, hey, I was, selling hats on the street in Queens, then you say, oh, okay, this guy has more credibility. I believe his story that much more. So I think that's pretty important.
Yeah, I think it does two things, your story. Number one, the more specific you are with your own story, the better people can apply it to themselves, which is often counterintuitive. So the fact that maybe I wasn't raised broke or I wasn't raised with a handout from my parents may be irrelevant, but putting it into context helps you kind of say, oh, I see how it fits for him, that bigger concept. Now I'm going to apply it to myself. And the other thing it does, I think, which Dorie did a nice job of talking about, is it gives people a point of entry. Because if I just talk about facts, it can be really dry. And and telling my story, whatever that is, can both be a source of authenticity, which makes people want to listen to me, and also a place to start the understanding. It gives them context. So telling stories can be a great way to help somebody understand the framework that you're using. So like with Stand Out, talking to people about, these big ideas doesn't really come to life until you've got the specific. And then you can go back and look at the rules and the guidelines and say, oh, I see how that applies to me.
So, one of the biggest struggles we have with the companies we represent, or even ourselves, is coming up with a framework for, number one, creating that story or developing that story, and then distributing that story to our potential customers. What advice do you guys have for just coming up with the ideas for stories? And then secondly, how do you distribute that story to your potential customers?
So Mark Levy, who's one of my favorite people and is an advisor on writing and a guru, and I think Dorie, you know him as well.
Yep.
He said something that really has stuck out in my memory, which is, if you're bored reading it, everybody else, or if you're bored writing it, they're going to be bored reading it. So a good place to start is to look for things that are interesting to you, and then see where that leads. So when you're writing and trying to explore an idea, start with, say, just write on the top of the page, things that are interesting to me right now, things I'm thinking about. Because if it's interesting to you, you're going to help other people see a way for it to be interesting to them. And if you're doing something that's really didactic and say, well, I'm going to do, like, I've found that I don't do any kind of 101 courses anymore, like beginners courses, because it's boring for me to write and it's boring for people to read. But if I say, here's advanced placement membership, here's how to think about membership models for people who already have successful models, not only is that useful for the people who are successful already, but it's really aspirational and interesting for the people who haven't gotten there yet. And it allows them to have a framework to come back to me with the questions about getting started. So it actually ends up being a much more useful kind of content.
Okay. Dorie?
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think it's really hard for us to see our own stories too. That's another point that bears mentioning. Part of why in Stand Out, I talk about this process of, before you're sharing your message, you really need to have this band of advisors, your own personal, your group of mentors, your personal board of directors, is that they are the people who can reflect back to you interesting things about yourself. Almost everybody, we are used to ourselves, and so therefore we think things about ourselves are normal, or we think they're boring, or we think, well, oh, everybody did that. And, the truth is, people oftentimes are really surprised. They say, oh, wow, you did that. And we just don't see it. We don't know what's interesting about ourselves. So having somebody be able to just listen and stop us and say, no, give us more about that. That's interesting. That's a real gift. And I think that we can't do it for ourselves.
Yeah. So how do you okay, so now you've created the stories. Now, how do you make sure that they're distributed to your target customers, whether you're a solo entrepreneur or whether you're a bigger business? Because this is another challenge. One challenge is getting the right story down that resonates with your clients. But the next challenge is distributing them to your potential clients. So that, for me, seems to be as important and as difficult as just coming up with the right story.
Yeah, well, part of it, like we were talking about earlier, Mark, is just repurposing content in a lot of ways, like you do so well, reaching people on different channels, making sure that that you're able to hit them wherever they are. I'm in the process right now of writing my third book, and I'm doing a series of interviews for it. And I am a lot smarter now than I was in writing my first book. And so one of the things that I'm doing, I'm just, recording these Skype interviews, and it's useful at a very basic level because, okay, now I have it recorded. So if I need to go back and figure out what they said, I have it. But above and beyond that, it's an hour of content. So what am I going to do with that? Well, when the book is getting ready to be released, I'll probably take excerpts of the best pieces of the conversation and put them on YouTube. I will probably take some of the best interviews and create them as a pre-order bonus, and people have special access to that. I may strip the video and turn them into a series of audio podcasts. I will probably write blog posts based on the interviews, including excerpts and outtakes and things that didn't make it into the book. So that 1 hour of the people's time will probably result in literally dozens of media mentions for them above and beyond them being mentioned in the book. So that's what I'm trying to do in terms of thinking about leverage.
Okay, Robbie?
Yeah, I mean, I think Dorie said it really well. I don't have anything to add right now.
Okay. Well, for us, right, when you're talking about distributing a story, it's really finding out what channels your audience is on. So our clients, We have a client now where they are not social, and I mean this. They're not even on LinkedIn. Most of their clients. It's pretty sad. So we have to go to webinars. They'll join a webinar and they have email. So our complete focus is on webinars and email, right? And if we went on Twitter or we went on Facebook, they wouldn't see anything that we'd ever done. So number one for us is finding out where our customers are consuming information. Sometimes it's print. And we're like, print? I'm not even sure we should take this account on, because we're not focused on print, nor do we want to be. So that's number one. And then number two, it's using tools. And I'd like to hear your guys' perspective on this. Is we like Facebook advertising as long as you could do it cheap. And then we like YouTube because we find that YouTube, if you got the right influencers that are promoting that message, we can get the message out very inexpensively. And because YouTube allows clicks within the video and in the comments, we find that it drives a lot of traffic for us. And if we can get other people to tell our stories, whether it's on YouTube or an ad on Facebook that leads to a video that we've done or somebody else has done, we find that's extremely effective. Just wondering if you guys have any comments on that, or you disagree, or you have another approach.
Yeah. So a big part of my approach has been working with organizations that have aligned goals. So being a thought leader on behalf of organizations that are trying to build interest for themselves. And so they're actually, I don't have to pay. And in many cases, I'm getting paid to participate in their social networking and their own content marketing plans. And so they're reaching out to their audiences with my content. And that's been very, very useful.
Okay, Dori?
Yeah, that's really great. I think in terms of other things that they mentioned, when I'm so enraptured by Robbie's answer.
Yeah, we have an audio issue here, unfortunately. So the question is, I use Facebook, I use YouTube.
Oh, right.
Leverage influencers.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you guys agree with that approach, or do you have a better approach to getting that story out?
Yeah, so I think those are totally good ways to do it. I think the most key thing for anything, I mean, now that we actually have the capacity to do it, is to be tracking. And so, for instance, a really valuable tool that it took me a while to adopt. You can kind of only do so many innovations at a time, but I got whole hog into it last year, and have steadily been expanding it out. My usage of it is Leadpages, which is really great because it allows you to create personalized landing pages that track your referral source for where you're getting email signups. And so that's super helpful because it enables you to really test your assumptions. And so, for instance, something that I wouldn't necessarily have been predicting, I thought that LinkedIn would be a really great source of email signups. When I was posting content there, guess what? Actually, Twitter is better, demonstrably better. And I'm posting these like whole articles on LinkedIn. Meanwhile, the Twitter, it's like a freaking tweet, and it's like, hey, download my free workbook, and the like crazy rate of signups. So that actually really surprised me. So it shows you where it's a good idea to invest your time and where it's not. I finally got around, literally this month, to tracking email signups off of my Harvard Business Review blog. Before, they were being tracked, but just as part of like the generalized group. And so I wasn't necessarily seeing how much was coming from HBR specifically. The signups there are through the roof. I have gotten more signups from that than from any other landing page on any other piece of content. So that's been a fantastic source, and I wouldn't necessarily have known that otherwise. So
HBR is allowing you to link back to a website or a landing page?
Yeah, just in your bio, your author bio.
Okay. Wow. I mean, that's pretty impressive. I don't get that kind of anywhere near that on Forbes, but they kind of hide it on Forbes anyway, so it's pretty tough. Yeah, I don't know if they allow you to link from the bio. I can't remember.
Yeah, actually, that's why I stopped writing for Forbes, was that they told me I couldn't, and I'm like, sorry, Buster.
Right, because you're driving a lot of traffic to them, and you got to get something out of it.
Yeah.
All right. So the last, actually, there's two more questions, but I really like this one because we're trying to figure this out, Robbie, as much as we can. So how do you turn customers into profitable customers for life? So let's say I sold them a widget or a book or some kind of membership course, what have you. How do I ensure that I keep these customers engaged with me and or the community? And then how do I continue to make more money from them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's really where I spend the majority of my time, is helping companies get off the hamster wheel of transactions and organizations. So like what you described, where you say, I have this one product, a lot of people bought it, and then they disappeared, and I never heard from them again. There's one is obviously subscription and a freemium model. So basically, some people are subscribing for free and others are paying, and the people that are paying are getting access to a higher level of content, often a higher level of access, because it's really about access over ownership and about better relationships. So coming up with that content, and it's not just content, it's those experiences, it's the connections with other people. There's certainly something to be said about conferring status on people in having like a walled community, but there's also something to be said about the quality of the conversation. So if you're in a large community and there are people saying, how do I get started? You might say, I've been doing this for 5 years, I'm really good at it, I'm willing to pay to just be with the other people like me. That in some ways, the higher the price, the better the quality of people that are going to participate. Because for them, that amount of money is a non-factor. So if you want to play at that high end, you want to really target for that niche, target the content and understand what their mission is, and build all of your offerings, not just the content, but also the connections, the community, the events, the concierge services and advisory that you might offer in an exclusive way, so that it really helps them to get where they're trying to go, whether that's to brand themselves, whether that's to build new customers for themselves. You want to really tap into that as opposed to falling in love with your own products.
Okay, Dorie, anything to add to that?
No, Robbie nailed it.
Excellent. Well, for me, I think when I look at the framework, and again, we're just developing this for our clients right now, but we really want to rally around a cause. And part of that's a story, but what are these customers really into? What do they like? What are they invested in? I think Red Bull does a very good job. They do a lot of good things, but they're around extreme sports. And if you like extreme sports, they've built a community. They've got content. I mean, they got the rights to all the events out there, so they're producing content on a regular basis. They got influencers in the riders themselves. They have this whole community that you just want to join. You almost forget that they're a beverage company because they've done such a great job of getting you to buy into their lifestyle, their community, their what sports that they sponsor. Seems like that. I mean, if you can get there, is nirvana.
Yeah, I think I actually see it a little bit differently. It's not like, for me, it's not so much about getting them to buy into your story. It's about you tapping into their needs. So I buy Red Bull because I'm thirsty and I need energy, but really I drink Red Bull because I want to participate in this extreme sport lifestyle. And this is one of the ways I do it. And if you say, okay, they're buying my product because it's one of the ways that they can achieve this much bigger mission that they have, which is maybe to be an extreme sport participant and success, or maybe it's to run a successful business. If you can tap into that, you get all kinds of ideas for additional things that you can do to help them achieve that mission, which drives greater loyalty and engagement.
Okay. Dorie, anything else to add to that before we move to the last question?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the idea of community cohesion and the community as part of your identity is really powerful. It's if you can align your brand or alongside of who your customers want to be or view themselves as, so that your brand becomes essentially an extension of their identity, that is enormously powerful and creates really long-lasting cohesion and relationships.
Yeah. You know who's great at that is CrossFit.
Oh yeah,
CrossFit.
exactly.
They are.
Yep.
They're really good.
That's,
You're right.
That's a brand. And, the Church of the Holy CrossFit is something that a lot of people really hold as dear to their heart as any religious group or any other affiliation that they have. And, I think we sometimes forget that is a for-profit brand that has become really a lifestyle and takes up people's time. I mean, they spend, like my sister is a CrossFitter and she spends about 20, 30 hours a week, connecting with these people, hosting CrossFit Driveway, writing a blog about CrossFit, all in addition to her regular full-time job as a psychologist. So, that's really what we're trying to do is create those super users who actually go out on our behalf and bring in other people.
Yeah, no, well said. I mean, CrossFit's probably one of the best examples, and they've done so many different things to keep people engaged in the community. They've made a lot of money doing it. They made a lot of other people money doing it.
Yeah.
So for my last question, I'd like you each to talk about your book in 60 seconds or less and why people should read it. What are the big ideas in these books and why is it important that people read it? Because, when I look at both of them, I think these are both must reads. So let's start with Dorie.
Okay, so my most recent book is called Stand Out, How to Find Your Breakthrough Idea and Build a Following Around It. And people, thank you, Robbie. There we go. That's the prop. People should read it if they want to become a thought leader or a recognized expert. It helps people develop and refine their ideas, the idea that they're going to be known for, and learn strategies so that they can promulgate them in order to get the respect that they and their ideas deserve.
Okay, and Robbie.
Yeah, so the membership economy, find your super users, master the forever transaction, and build recurring revenue is a great book if you're interested in building long-term formal relationships with your customers that drives revenue. So it's all about a forever transaction, which is kind of a succinct way of saying people decide to work with you, they decide that you have what they need, and they commit to paying you and being part of what you do, and stop making individual decisions about every product, service, article. Should I do it? Should I not do it? But rather say, this is part of my habits. This is part of my daily life, and I'm not going to rethink that decision.
Very well said. You both are very succinct and have got that down to a short soundbite. So thank you very much. So I want to let everyone know, hey, please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists. And as a reminder, if you want the replay, we're going to post this on Forbes. We're going to put this on YouTube and on the fanaticsmedia.com site. So if you missed it or you want to see it again, that's where we're going to put it. So thank you, Dorie. Thank you, Robbie. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for having us.